to welcome you to our third session of the day. So we're gonna kick off this session with a presentation from Chanel and Jackie. They're going to present to us multilingual pedagogies and Africanization in the curriculum. So I will just ask you to come forward, Jackie and Chanel, and I would like you to introduce yourselves in the way that you are free to introduce, because sometimes, you know, we tend to read long bios and etc., and you just want to be known or people to remember you as, you know. So please come forward, and let's give them a hand. So I'm going to hand over to you. You've got 20 minutes. And I think you also need to leave a bit of space for discussion.
Okay, I'm very short. There we go. I think it's fine now. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'll introduce myself. I'm Chanel van der Merwe. I've introduced myself now. Okay, so maybe just a little bit more. I'm a lecturer in linguistics, and my focus is on language policy, PhD candidates at UCT on language policy in higher education, but I'm also a part of the language working group, myself, Jackie, and Prof. Pamela Maseko, and that language policy sits in the office of the DVC LNC. So thank you so much for having us, and we will speak on, obviously, on as Dr. Tlangoti said, on issues of Africanization and multilingual pedagogies. I thought we'd start with Ngugi. We lost a giant this week, and I think no one else has said it as substantively as Ngugi said, and it has highlighted this link between language and Africanization. So he passed on 28th of May this week, and he has left us an archive to work with in terms of decolonization and in terms of Africanization itself. I thought I was looking at my book. I took it out this morning, just looked at like things that I've highlighted over the years because I always reread it. And some of the things that he said, the choice of language and the use to which language is put essential to a people's definition of themselves in relation to their natural and social environment, and indeed in relation to the entire universe. So how we see ourselves and position ourselves in the world has a lot to do with language and the frameworks it has and imposes in our minds. Probably the most important one, language as culture, is a collective memory bank of people's experiences in history. So language is not just a tool. Language is knowledge. Language is culture. And so by having one language and being monolingual and having a monolingual ideology, we are also limiting ourselves in the knowledges that we are exposed to. And then lastly, I think this question speaks to Africanization very broadly. The question is this: from what base do we look at the world? And so Ngugi was renowned for speaking from Africa. And so why he's important for our presentation today is because he makes the link between language and where we speak from very, very clearly. Okay. Multilingualism. When we think about that, we tend to think about this idea of language and it being separate and it being the same everywhere. It's not the same everywhere. The multilingualism that exists in South Africa is different to the multilingualism in New York, is different to the multilingualism in Nairobi, is different to the multilingualism in India, right? So what is multilingualism here is very important question to answer. So in South Africa, our apartheid and colonial language policies, so a part of that is that there was a government-initiated de-intellectualization of African languages. And one example that shows this quite clearly is that the first evidence of Afrikaans being written down was in the 1920s. The first evidence of isiXhosa being written down is in the 1820s. right? So even though we know this, even though there's 100-year lapse where isiXhosa has preceded Afrikaans of being a written language, why is Afrikaans currently a language that is way ahead, if we can put it in that way, in certain domains of scientific knowledge. So we call this a de-intellectualization, because the language is already intellectual, right? And so the idea is that we are re-intellectualizing the language, and that is the perspective we take in language policy, particularly at NMU. Basic education language policies, as we know, are informed by very Anglo-normative ideologies, meaning that English is the be-all, end-all. This is changing, however. So where the switch was from in grade 4 to English from the home language, that is now changing with mother tongue-based bilingual education, but this is new still, right? And so we're still getting a cohort of students who think that bringing African languages in is illicit. Right? So when they come to higher education, we have multilingual language policies, but they still come with those ideologies of these languages as illicit. These languages cannot carry knowledge. So in 2002, when the first higher education language policy was introduced, it looked at languages as African languages as tools mostly. However, the new language policy framework looks at African languages as sources of knowledge. So we have work to do in terms of developing and capacitating African languages as sources of knowledge. Just a little bit of language demographic, it's part of the slide of what is multilingualism here. So at NMU, I just put the 4 main language groups in terms of the language demographics. isiXhosa is still the largest part of who our students are. If you ask who are our students. After that, English is still a significant part of that, isiZulu as well, and Sepedi. So those are the 4 major language groups in the science faculty. Okay, so I thought I'll speak a little bit about translanguaging, because we've all heard about this idea of translanguaging, right? And I think Prof. Nkovani already spoke about it, so I will just touch on it as well. So the way in which we approach it at Mandela is that we say that we look at translanguaging in terms of horizontal and vertical translanguaging. And we're saying that horizontal translanguaging is the normal way of how we communicate, because Fader and Van Nis, 2 scholars said, multilingualism is the African lingua franca. It is how we communicate. We communicate across different languages just every day, just normally, right? So this is what we call horizontal translanguaging. So when in the classroom, we have our students as language brokers between one another. They might have different languages that they use, and we allow that to happen. We are enabling horizontal translanguaging. And so this is this idea of fluidity between language borders, because in essence, we don't necessarily think about language as very much bordered in Africa. However, this is still an academic institution, and we need to have borders between languages, right? Because we need to think about the fact that language has to be written down in English, right? So that we are not there at the point where we can write in assessments in African languages yet. So what we're saying is that vertical, horizontal, this idea of fluidity in the classroom and language brokering should be accompanied with vertical or pedagogical translanguaging. And this is where we separate the languages. And we recognize that they are different from one another. And this is where we incorporate very strategic and intentional practices of translation, of things like glossaries, in the classroom. We incorporate these pedagogical tools that separate the languages, but that can be used as resources. So we have these 2, vertical and horizontal translanguaging. So someone like Kathleen Yeh, who we had a seminar with at the beginning of the year for all our language champions, so I am including a lot of her slides. So what she says is that in the classroom we need to incorporate both. We need to have classroom discussions where we have horizontal translanguaging, where students can be language brokers for one another, but we also need to have vertical translanguaging as a pedagogical practice. And she basically puts down particular activities that one can do, particularly when we look at vertical or pedagogical translanguaging and the difference between the two. So in horizontal translanguaging, so there are a lot of studies being done on both. So in a study that Prof. Maseko has done, I think at Rhodes, there was a study on a physics class, and where they incorporated horizontal translanguaging. So what the students did was they observed class students discussing in the physics class. So what the students did was that they used the concepts so they kept the concepts in English: volt, lead, circuits, but they did the discussion and the understanding and the sense making in isiXhosa. Right? So that would be a form of horizontal translanguaging. Vertical translanguaging, on the other hand, would be, as I said, very intentional uses of, like, incorporating the glossaries, incorporating the translation. And what Yug says here that's very interesting, and she says that where the magic lies is where paraphrasing and summarizing happen, because that happens in the mind. But how does it happen in the mind of a multilingual person, right? And there she says it is that's actually magical. Because we can't see it, because there are a lot of things that are going on there. And she says that one strategy that one can use is when one reads in the L1, not the L1, but when one reads in the EMI, the English Medium Instruction, one can then ask students to paraphrase in their own language, right? So how do I understand what I'm reading and paraphrase that in my own language? And then we can then finally ask the students then to summarize again, either in their home language or back into English. So you can see the scaffolding process that takes place, but you can see how we need intentional classroom practices in order to enable that. So those would be the differences between the vertical and the horizontal. However, Kathleen says it doesn't stop with translanguaging, it needs to go to transknowledging, right? Language is not just a tool, it's more than that. Right? Multilingualism education is more than just language. It is how we are drawing on students' language repertoires and how we are drawing on students' knowledge, what they bring into the classroom and in terms of their knowledge capabilities. So she speaks about transknowledging as a two-way reciprocal process of knowledge translation, because students bring in knowledges as well. So they understand through their language the world differently, as I referring back to Ngugi. So she then refers to these triangular relationalities, and she says this mimics IKS. And the way in which IKS also looks at knowledge. And she says that whereas in IKS there is a balance between epistemology, cosmology, and ontology. And whereas in Western epistemologies we might just focus on epistemology, but in many IKS instances there's a balance between epistemology, cosmology, and ontology. Through the reciprocal use of language, through in terms of the translation, we are then able to draw on these triangle relationalities. And so she says that when one asks, what does this mean in your culture? What does this mean in your language? What does this mean in your own ways of being? One is also creating equal power relations in the class where everyone brings different knowledges to the classroom, and everyone is asked about their different knowledge structures. So it is creating this equal classroom through this idea of transknowledging. So the idea is that we want to end up here. We want to end up with this idea of translanguaging, transknowledging that intersect with translating and interpreting. And the idea is that we want to end up where we have a multilingual education for equality, where we employ horizontal, we employ vertical translanguaging with the idea of how does it link to knowledge systems? How does it enrich the canon? How does it enable epistemic access? And also, how does it diversify other forms of knowledge, particularly Western forms of knowledge? I'll hand over to Jackie for the rest.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Jackie, also from the Faculty of Humanities, but I also belong to the DVC in terms of being part of the language working group. And also just to thank our colleague, we've also had her recently in our faculty at our language, our curriculum conversation. So what Chanel has spoken to you about my role is just to talk a little bit, then bring it a bit more closer to science and the disciplines of science. And I want to show you that there are good practices. Since the 1990s, there's a lot of studies being done on science and multilingualism. I'm just highlighting a few here for you that you can look at. The first one is a literature survey internationally of multilingualism used in the class. I worry a bit that a lot of it is functional multilingualism, Chanel, where it's used as a tool for meaning making, like, and not moving yet to trans-knowledging. But when we get to the second one, trans-languaging in elementary science, that's a very nice article. It shows you a lot of detail how this teacher is using trans-languaging in a science class. But very exciting is Blackie, she's from UCT, her 2024 article on IKS and science education, where she says that science advances she talks about two ways in which science advances its knowledge. I'm not going to go into the details, you know this, but she says one of the levels in which indigenous knowledge systems and science, where they are similar. They are similar in terms of how they would carefully, the observations would be careful and accurate in terms of how they observe the natural world and so forth. So in that level, she says, IKS and science is similar. She says, but where it differs is after this observation. The explanations we use, the conceptual explanations for what we observe, comes then from the Western canon of classification. If you use botany or whatever, how things are classified, those family, genus, species, I don't know, domains, all those things is from a Western canon. Whereas IKS would use a different classification mode, or different ways of understanding, maybe linking it like the Western notion of science, linking it to the similar characteristics, but then also looking at it in terms of sustainability, in terms of usefulness. For communities, in terms of traditions and culture coming strongly there. So Blackie then argues, how do we then expose our students to different ways of knowing in science, different classifications, for example. So I thought I'll just share that article with you. Then what Chanel says, how do I then start in my own class with multilingual pedagogies through what Gidi and them are doing, through the multilingual tutoring that you, in your lovely proposal you gave us, that you want to do, through trans-languaging and trans-knowledging, how are we getting the classes to discuss and jointly negotiate scientific knowledge. Lemke, who is a physicist and a linguist, so he's a very interesting person, talks about talking science through language, how we negotiate and come to conceptual understandings of science through language. How do we form communities of practice then within, the science faculty, where we not only look at how we learn and teach, but how we engage with communities, for scientific knowledge. A project I was involved with 2 years ago, CPUT, they did a glossary development, but it was very interesting because the person who did it, that I was working with, he not only asked his students for translations of terms, but the students went back home to the communities and they actually got verification from the communities and their families about the glossaries. So Ignatius Tisha, he did a very interesting glossary development study. And then translation of slides and assessment translation. Yeah, I'm going to go back to Jeug. Jeug did a study in 2006, where a large cohort did assessments, because I know this is an issue. Hajira came up. Where's Hajira? She at our last discussion, you spoke about your concerns around assessment, and they did an assessments in mathematics with grade 8 learners in 3 languages, but the difference here was it was in one document, so it wasn't separate. Like the students come up, which language do I want to choose? I'm going to choose the English one. They had all 3 languages in the Western Cape in one doc, and the study showed that the students said they referred to all 3 languages. They wrote in English, but they referred to all 3 questions, and it showed that the cohort, they had a monolingual cohort and a multilingual cohort writing. The multilingual cohort did better than the monolingual ones who only had the English version of the test. So not to separate it during assessments will become important, that they see it, that resource in all 3 languages. Then We want to end with some provocations for ourselves as well, notes to ourselves in the humanities, wherever we are, DVC, wherever we are, colleagues. It's who are our students and what do they know? And I suppose this also includes who are our staff. Is English enough? Neville Alexander asks us, is English enough? I was reminding Chanel this morning about the Charter for the Humanities, when the task team, when they were busy with it in 2023, one of the quotes that they said, and I don't know if I've got it here, I must just check, I wrote it down last night, where they said, does the fact that there are, now this is a humanities reference, I know, does the fact that there are at least 23 ways of describing poverty in the Nguni oral lexicon offer a way of understanding agency and poverty better? So the fact that English has got this one word, and they were saying in the Nguni languages there are 23 different ways of describing it. So it offers us a greater understanding then of a concept. So where am I? Okay. Are our students' languages problems or resources? Chanel spoke about that. And I want to paraphrase Neville Alexander in his 2012 book. Now, Neville Alexander has been a linguist that has been very concerned about the language question. Not the national question, Denver, I suppose that as well. But he threw out a challenge to us. He said, will South African intellectuals find courage and imagination, and this is how many years later, we're still here, to move away decisively from our current English mainly, and often English-only language practices with all its negative outcomes for students? We know that language helps with cognitions. I mean, there's lots of research that shows that. But we want to move beyond this. How do we demonstrate the value of indigenous languages in science? And there again, I want to go back to Buyiswe Ewan and that fabulous project that you have now, that for the language project, that's talking exactly to this, and we look forward to what's going to emerge from that project, because I think you are moving beyond functional multilingualism when it's just like translating for equivalence, but you are tapping into knowledge now and adding to the canon and diversifying it. You're moving towards trans-knowledging. So my last provocation then is, how can Western science meaningfully engage with indigenous knowledge systems by engaging also in IKS explanations for what is observed, for what is empirical, and different ways then of classification, for example, and that emerges then through multilingual pedagogies. So I'd like to end there, colleagues. Chanel and I are done. Okay. Okay. Did we? Okay. That's good, isn't it? Yes. Were we supposed to be next?
No. I thank you so much for that lovely presentation. You know, it reminded me when I wrote my drivers, the learners, right? You know, because it's English and Afrikaans and Xhosa in our days. And there was one question which I couldn't understand in English. So I couldn't choose a correct answer. But I got a clue from the Xhosa version of it, and I passed that learner's test. So really, indeed, what we are discussing today can really take us forward if we really are focused and we allow our mindsets to be transformed. So on that note, please jot down your questions for the language panel. For now, I'm going to bring in the panel presentations, and then after they're done, then I'm going to allow a discussion. We've got 30 minutes to allow a discussion to everybody. So you can just sit and relax. Can I call all four? Okay, all three. Konisani is online, or the video will be played. I don't think he's going to present it online, but there's a video, there's a recording. Can I call now our panel presenters on multilingualism, Sean, Dipuo, and Luzuko. Sean, you're going to start, and I will request that Dipuo and Luzuko take a seat for now. You only have 5 minutes. I see, Sean, you can approach. You only have 5 minutes, right? So I'm hoping that you're going to be very quick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Yes, I want to tie into Chanel's presentation and what we're doing basically in chemistry. So to introduce myself, I'm Sean Gous from the chemistry department. I'm senior lecturer there, and I'm also program coordinator for the Diploma Chemical Process Technology. And a lot of the emphasis, what we're going to talk about is basically how do we take our students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, rural areas, coming to this university for the first time and to an English environment and actually losing their home language. So what we've done in this, and you will see it in the presentation, is we basically look at translations and look at glossaries. So using multilingualism as a technique in teaching. So many African children are taught in language they do not speak at home. And we have seen this from various discussions this morning, that they actually have grown up in the home language and then they come here and now all of a sudden they need to introduce with English. And as Dr. Jack also discussed this morning with the student coming from the Sikisiki, coming from mathematics, and then they have to fail because of a language barrier. So I want to talk a little bit about that and how we can actually maybe use other tools like glossaries to overcome. So teaching in diverse classrooms, we know there's language barriers. Our students come from diverse backgrounds, not necessarily only Xhosa or Zulu speaking, but also from other provinces in this province. So there's a whole range of languages and cultures. So we're learning styles and abilities, and of course the diversity in our classrooms that need to be adhered to. And for that we can utilize quite a few tools. Right, so I like this presentation, this slide, because this tells us quite a bit on what we also talked about. I think it was in a faculty L&T meeting on Monday, and that is the scaffolding what Mr. Saba was talking about. So here we have basically where's your underline, and then basically the underline there for the scaffolding is how do you take the students to the next level? How do you bridge that gap between the culture that they're growing up with to the university culture and to the internationalization and then of Africanization. So yeah, we have quite a few. We hear the student's voice. Just see my cursor here. So the student voice is very important, right? So we need to listen to our students, right? What they need. And I know for me, from an Afrikaans-speaking person, as well as in English, sometimes treating too fast or whatever for the students, but the students need to grasp what you're saying, and especially in a language that they don't understand or not frequently use. And then we can bridge the gap and we can start building our scaffolding from the English and actually have translators, have peer form, using the students and the different cultures, maybe third years to second years, or even in a class environment where they talk about in their own language and actually explain to one another what terms are and what it means, especially in the technology. So it's not just what we talk about this morning, and I think our speaker from Freestyle mentioned that, and that is basically, it's not just the English, right? It's the technology also. So we also taught in our disciplines. So how do you cross from the English just only to also our disciplines that we taught in? So we need to, in different cultures, we need to build these walls, and then specifically thought in counts, we lead to barriers to understand, and then building bridges, not walls in the mathematical expression, but in foster connections, cooperation, understanding between different parties. So we can do this through building up, for understanding existing knowledge, interaction with exercise, procedures and concepts of introduction. And we can guide the students, and we can give them translations, and then also use different means, like, for example, multilingual approaches in the classroom environment, where they can interact with one another. One of the lecturers is coming from Natal area, which is frequently in Zulu and in Xhosa. He can actually contribute also to the students, and they can explain to that. You don't want to exclude your English-speaking class, but you can actually incorporate most of the students then in a classroom environment. A glossary was then developed. I'm busy with this probably the last couple of years, and that have now been translated into 4 different languages, taking basically chemistry terms and technology terms. And we're currently busy with this, with Internet translating that in 8 languages. So another 4 additional languages that's coming in. Swani, Zulu, Swani, and Benda that have also come into this translation. And we hope to actually, when the time comes, to actually publish this into a much bigger forum. And this is how it's actually constructed. So there's one word, baffles, for example, which is a partition with mountainside equipment for heat exchanges, but then translated into Afrikaans, Xhosa, isiZulu. So the students can now start understanding it in their own language. All right, so that was better. Even if the assessments are still in English, they have a way to understand this in their own language. So this is how we're constructing our glossary, and we put that together. So we use this as a goal with the tools to classic glossaries and translation to convey certain concepts. We then languaging and to individuals in conversation that help them also to build and help in understanding. And when we use translation, introduction to paragraphs and study guides, it can also assist the learners. And using local examples, that is very important. I think we also alluded to this in translations and so on. Use local examples. Especially for us in the chemical technology field, most of the things in the Western side or US or in the European context, and I use quite a bit of that for process safety and so on aspects, but there's a lot of that happening also in South Africa, what we can utilize and actually bring into our lecturing environment. Jay, that is mine in short. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to now allow the student voice in the room to present to us. She's going to introduce herself. 5 minutes.
Good morning to everybody. My name is Dipo Grace Ripe, and I'm the current Faculty of Science SRC representative, and I'm going to be giving my perspective of how we can include multilingualism in science. So Nelson Mandela once said that after climbing a great hill, only one finds that there are many more hills to climb. And I feel like that encompasses this project that the Faculty of Science is trying to introduce. And in 1976, the black youth of the Soweto uprising fought against the use of Afrikaans in school, and that alone was a significant moment that showed how important language is in education. So, given the history of our country, we often think of language in a political aspect, and we cannot erase how important it is for people to express themselves in their home languages, and freely so, because language was once used as a weapon of oppression. Okay, so my overview of the presentation is going to be introducing the topic, the importance of multilingualism, the current barriers that are in multilingualism, and how we can implement the strategies, and then my conclusion. So multilingualism matters because South Africa in its own is the epitome of multilingualism. We have 11 official spoken languages, and so it does not make sense that that is not reflected in our educational spaces, especially higher education where professionals have been trained, people that are going to be involved in the boardrooms, making change that is going to be impacting the society as a whole. So we have to understand that as much as English is used as a medium of instruction in the basic education, there is a language difference because most of our parents, most of our grandparents, people that we live with at home, they cannot converse in English in a level that we, the younger generation, can. So oftentimes you find yourself in school, you have to do a bit of code switching. You speak the level of English that you speak in a classroom, but when you go home, you sort of have to regress a bit. And so that causes problems in comprehension. Sometimes you can read English, talk in English, but the comprehension level, and that often creates a gap in terms of assessments. As much as we have this dream of multilingualism, there are barriers that exist. And the first one is resistance and the lack of support. As much as we want to implement this, it has to go beyond the black and white. It has to go beyond policy and go beyond paper. And that is creating a culture, creating a mindset where people say, we live in South Africa. How can I be comfortable only knowing one language? How can I be comfortable only being fluent in English when I live among Zulu people, Tswana people, and Xhosa people? So some people might have resistance in terms of adopting multilingualism, especially in classrooms, and there might be a lack of support that doesn't enable this to be successful at the ground level. So that is the first barrier that I could think of, that we could sit here all day and talk, could make a policy, but would it be implemented successfully so? And as a person that came from Free State, only speaking Sesotho, I had to adapt and speak Xhosa when I came here. And I've also did science in high school. And I can confidently say that there are gaps when it comes to translation of the material that I've learned. And there's a lack of scientific vocabulary in our African languages. For example, I cannot think of a word, a Sotho word for gravity. And that is one of the biggest things that I had to learn in physics. So imagine having to sit down as an assessor and having to translate the word. It's going to require a lot of consultations with the language practitioners. And a lot of our current learning material exists in English, so a lot of work has to be done in terms of translating, and there are limited languages that are known by the staff, which is why I think this brings how important diversity is in the STEM spaces, because if there are not a lot of people that can translate your material, it will only exist currently in English until we train someone that is versed in Tswana that can then come and translate the language material. However, there is hope. We can adopt a few teaching strategies where there's use of translanguaging in class discussions, where I think our speaker channel spoke about it, where she called it the horizontal, I think, where students are able and allowed to speak their languages in class. I don't think it's fair that when a person speaks their language, our first thought sometimes is to be offended. Let's be curious. What do you mean by that? Don't be offended. I think that's how we can start in adopting a culture of multilingualism. We have to be multilingual ourselves in order to make it a reality. And this can come from offering tutorials in different languages, allowing code switching, and the translation of learning materials. I think this will require collaboration between departments and also institutions. Because I know in Free State, it's majorly Sesotho, KwaZulu-Natal is Zulu. So if you have majority of Pedi people, consult people in University of Limpopo. Surely there are a lot of Pedi-speaking people there that are professionals in the area that you are teaching, and they can be able to do this collaborative work on making sure that students are allowed to have that scaffolding aspect of their education. So I think also this will help where students can now, I think in science, comprehension is most important. So the use of analogies in our native languages can also help. Like I said, it's hard to directly translate. So peer-led group studies where people sit down and explain concepts to each other through the use of analogies can help enhance the comprehension, which I think is one of the things our lecturers complain about, that you do get the question, but you kind of miss the mark. You answered, you gave me a whole page, but you didn't answer what I wanted. We lack that comprehension, and I think using our native languages will help bridge that gap. So I'm just showing a Venn diagram of how the scaffolding multilingualism offers can create understanding, contribute to decolonization, equity, and student success. And this can be done through creating a curriculum that is transformative and inclusive. Thank you for listening. This brings me to the end.
Is there no mic on the couch here? Yeah. Thank you so much. Our next, I'm very much impressed by Dipo, by the way. He joined our first FLTC meeting, and I think we're going to have a very fruitful journey with you in your term. Thanks for your presentation. Our next presenter will be Luzuko. He's going to speak from where he is seated at this point. So you can just go ahead, Luzuko. You have 5 minutes.
One, two. Greetings. Dumelang Sanbonani, Molweni, in the name of diversity and multilingualism. My name is indeed Luzuko Mbumbulwana. I'm a student in the chemistry department doing my master's. And I must say that I'm honored and happy to be part of this conversation on multilingualism. Multilingualism or multilingual, which is part of the project that the university has undergone for a while now of Africanization and decolonization. But before I can go into that, I'll just chip in a historical context of where the relevance now of multilingualism in the South Africa that we have becomes relevant. And that is from, without dating the dates and what, but the historical context is that one of the exclusion of the indigenous languages of the majority of South Africans, and the substitution or replacement by foreign languages that were used in a brutal way to control, not just physically but also mentally, the minds of the black people, and not just that, to sustain also the economic system that was dominant prior the current democratic dispensation. So from that history, the dominant languages, which were English and Afrikaans, up until now have still been their dominant languages as medium of instruction, from your basic to your medium school to high school to universities, which now is where the problem comes in, where, as Diplupuo said, the barriers between those transitions of schooling levels, which are created by that imposition of a foreign language on a majority of people that do not use that language at home or from birth. So scholars have said what that impact has done in terms of post-traumatic evolutions and symptoms of all of that experience that our parents have gone through, which was brutal, but with us has been slightly softer in terms of tone, but still is still dominant in the ways that we do things in our everyday life, in our culture, in our interactions. Those languages and their domination of our identities as African still persist even today. So that is where the relevance of multilingualism comes in. And I wrote a few things on what impedes currently multilingualism in schools or in universities. And a few have been mentioned, and they're quite a mouthful, those such as the resistance of academics, the resistance of students, the resistance of parents, because of that historical belief that has been instilled of the superiority and the universality of those dominant languages. So those resistance as well still demonstrate themselves even in the university spaces. Hence, for example, the basic example would be the 1976 one, and then the recent one would be that of Fees Must Fall and Rose Must Fall movements, which from that reflection you would see that it is the current generation of young people who still felt alienated and or for lack of a better word, felt like foreigners in the land of their birth. Also because most of the institutions or the schools that we go to or the workplaces are historically institutions that were built or created not necessarily for our own benefit or for our own inclusion. So that, I would say, is one of those reasons. I think in one part that I wrote here, there's Prof. Jansen, who wrote a lot, I think, about that. The previous Vice Chancellor of UFS. And other scholars that also spoke about why multilingualism is not necessarily being accepted as a tool to decolonize or Africanize the ways that we relate in the spaces where we meet or we engage or we work. Are those issues also that relate to investment and funding that Prof. Kit mentioned? But I think it's issues that we know, and I think most of the speakers spoke much of what needs to be done, more than us just speaking about these issues and the experiences that we've had because of these exclusions that still persist. But what we should be doing now is crafting mechanisms that will enable, I think the term was functional multilingualism, if multilingualism in action now. I think it was said that the multilingual state is unseen, but the functionality would be translated by, I think, after the assessments or all that work has been done. Yeah, I think I'm just going into it now, but I'll wrap it up very soon. So one of the points that I believe points that the university and the faculty could do as well in the name of bringing justice to the languages and promoting the diversity is not just, I think Prof. Kit, when he explained that fund, because I do believe it's a relevant point to having things actually move and things coming out as the outcomes that are desired. The budget allocations and prioritizing the needs for students or the need for the transformation that young people want. I don't know if that makes sense. Because most of the time you find that there are conferences, there are talks, there are engagements, but the translation takes 10 years until the next business fall comes and the next generation is tired, right? Because there was no investment in those digital platforms that are coming in now. AIs, or whatever platforms that we say we can use to develop our languages and bring them to the same equal footing, or maybe close to the global or universal language. Because there are examples of countries that are well established in using their languages. And I do believe they probably have grown to a point where their functional multilingualism and development of that is in a far greater level. However, us taking too much in our talking and our lack of investing energy or even that money from the budgets that the university will say they don't have or they what, but they know what their students need, right? But that in turn, I think, as other scholars speak to, I don't know if they say it's a psychological violence or it's a, but it's a silent kind of violence, right? You know what your students need, you know what they're experiencing, but, right, the conversations are there, no translation. That perpetuates, I think, DVC Jack, that exploitation, that oppression in language, in culture, in all of those aspects for black people, black students that come into these universities or schools because their parents send them there for this English education, which is considered, right, to carry weight and will bring you to a certain proximity, right? So we follow those. But when we do get there, it's a struggle for us now, right, to assimilate. I don't know if I make sense, but I think that's what the university could fast track their action on, maybe, as on top of what Omamu Ungubane has put, which is, I believe, even these pages of mine, I would have just put them inside because she captured me holistically on what the curriculum needs to focus on, right? More than looking at even the needs of the teachers now, because even those could be put on a higher level than the needs of the students, right? So I think, without saying much, I'll just put all of that there and then let the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, now colleagues, we have our last where we're going to cue the video. I'm sure it's ready. You can play. That's for Qonisani Kwabe.
Sanbonan Dumelang Abushin Nda Ikamelam Qonisani Kwabe. I am from the faculty and in particular the Department of Agricultural Sciences. I'm very happy to be a part of this panel. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. I'm more happy because it is a multilingualism focused panel, so I guess I will be allowed to speak isiZulu. I will be allowed ukuthetha kancane. I'm going to chip in a bit of Xhosa, and yazi ukuthi this is Xhosa land, but don't kill me if I annihilate your language. And I'm also going to acknowledge my Sotho students from the University of the Free State, where I was previously, because they actually played a significant role in trying to transform my way of thinking and practicing in the classroom. It is for them, by the way, that I found myself enrolling for a multilingualism course at UNISA. 5 minutes is a very short period of time, so I'm going to just make an example about something. But before I do that, I want to to talk about the indigenous communities from where I conduct my research. These would mainly be in the northern KwaZulu-Natal. And these are communities where you get ogogo nomkhulu that are still hardcore your indigenous peoples. IsiZulu esikhulunywayo, isiZulu esiqinile, the food that they eat, ukudla kwesintu, ukudla kwesiZulu. They believe in storytelling. There's bagqoka, okay, ugqoka ke, I guess they're a bit modern, but everything else of theirs, it speaks to isintu. Nizongixolela. I will try to speak ngesiZulu, but it is not an easy thing. So having interacted with those communities and having learned the importance of language and the importance of practice generally when we interact with our students, I realized ukuthi my model of teaching, especially as it relates to language, wasn't doing justice, at least not fully, to the students that I stood in front of and the students that I always love having conversations with. Case in point, my research is in the northern KwaZulu-Natal. I'm at the University of the Free State, and I keep making examples about taro all the time. I talk about the lifestyle of these communities, KwaZulu. I talk about how they're so good with storytelling. The food that they eat is so amazing. And then I talk about the challenges that they experience. But in so doing, I go back to taro. I talk about taro with my students. And one lady stands up at the back. She is from Mangaung, the Mangaung area, and she says, "Sir, you always talk about this taro. What is taro? We know you do work in KZN and around indigenous things, but what is taro? Can you explain to us?" So I try to explain it. It's a white tuber that looks like this, and it looks like a potato, really. Excuse me. But if you don't put salt in it, you can't stomach it. And the conversation continued. They were still very, very lost. Until one day, I had in one of my slides amadumbe, and I said, "Oh, taro, how I miss thee." Literally just like that. And they said, "So this is taro? Amadumbe." And it was a light bulb moment for me, because so Sutu people call them madumbis. They're like, madumbis, but you call them taro? And Zulu speaking students are like, sonke lesikhathi ukhuluma ngamadumbe. And I realized ukuthi, the language thing is very important, because even when we give examples, we can't fully say that we've done justice if our students cannot relate to what it is that we talk about. I think there's value in meeting them halfway. While we use the colonial language, which in this case would be English or Afrikaans, if we're still teaching Afrikaans, it's equally important to bring in indigenous languages, especially when you make examples in the classroom. You can teach in English. I think many of us can teach ngesingisi. It's not very easy for me at least, to teach in isiZulu. But the examples that I make, I always say it's very important to make examples in a language that students can understand. Even if they are a diverse group of students, by virtue of you speaking in your own language, there will be another student that is going to understand and explain better in their mother tongue. But in English, something gets lost in translation. I've seen that. I have another student who is in my honors class. His name is Garabo Muchele. And there's one thing he likes saying. Almost all the time when you meet, I would ask him to speak, and he would say, But no, you want me to speak in English. This will not land. My response is not going to land the way that I want it to land. And that's a statement again. People must be given voices to speak in their languages, to learn in their languages, because learning becomes a bit easier for them. And I think language is just a communication tool, and we can communicate in whatever language. If you don't understand, what I've learned to do now is to say, somebody must translate for me. I remember I used to do that quite a lot when I was still in the Free State. Somebody would translate for me. If nobody could translate, I would have to go to Google in front of the students, and then it would be a laughing matter, but I would have learned a word. And that for me was highly valuable. I do have a question, and I'm way beyond my time. I do have a question though. And I think this would be directed to my mother, Unomalungelo Ngubane. And when we consider the historical context, I know I may be politically incorrect here, but we draw so much from the West. In the world of work, we get opportunities abroad. We, in higher education, we partner with people abroad or stakeholders. And already, when we want to study abroad, we have to write language proficiency tests. So the question for me remains now, as we are on this transformation agenda, when we do that, don't we disadvantage our students by now saying we need to fully adopt to isiXhosa or to fully adopt in isiZulu or any other language? That's the first question that I have. We are not multilingual ourselves as lecturers. I think that's something worth acknowledging as well. It's all good and well to speak in an indigenous language and to just have that interaction with students, ngolimi lwakho. But I think sometimes it's important to acknowledge ukuthi we ourselves still need to do a bit of learning. But in doing that, I really wish that we could, and in this platform, I wish we could think about the future. Where do these conversations take us to? What does it mean for the students? Because this is something I've asked quite a number of people, but I haven't gotten a clear answer. I myself am still trying to figure out what it means for students. If I were to say I'm teaching my students in isiZulu purely, what is the end goal and what would the world look like for them post Nelson Mandela University? I thank you.
Thank you so much to all our presenters. Can we give them another round of applause? Okay, sure, we've had a lot. So now I'm going to open the floor for interaction. Not necessarily questions, but let's ask, let's make comments, let's make recommendations, let's give input. So who's going to go first? We already have a first question, so we note that. So we've got, I don't know how many questions did you ask. I think it's a lot of questions, but I'm going to give you time, Dr. Ngubane, to answer. Because we already have that question. Let me see the hands. One. Lubabalo. Okay, so I'll take a Percy. I had to think about his name because I've forgotten his name. So I'll take Percy, and I'll take Lubabalo, Chris, and then you'll be in the next round. No? Just don't forget to lift your hands up again. So go for it. Where's the mic? That side? No, we're going to take 3 questions, and then it will be 4 with Dr. Ngubane. Sorry about that. So you can ask anyone, obviously.
Okay, yes, I don't know. I think the first one really is just a comment, maybe more like a worry and a real question. And my worry is if we learn from other institutions, if you look at the Free State, Stellenbosch, they had both English and Afrikaans running at the same time, and they experienced a lot of issues there, right? The issues of polarization, where you would have all black students attending English classes, and then you have white students attending Afrikaans classes, and then the issues, again, concerns on bias to say students who are, taught in Afrikaans, things are made easier for them. Are we not worried about that? But that's just a sideshow. My real question is, pretty much also to Dr. Ngubane, to say I'm more of a practical person. And in sciences, I teach first years now, and we are content driven. It's heavy on content. And the only time we get to interact with students easier is during lab sessions and during TAT sessions. And if we allow students to be able to, or to encourage them to speak their language, won't that create issues? And I will tell you where I come from. I had one group of students when I was teaching BSc 1. They are Afrikaans students. They were taught in Afrikaans from primary and secondary schools, and they were in my class. And after my class, they came to me asking if they could go to another lecturer who is Afrikaans, right? Because they struggled to understand English, and worse, I'm also a second language English speaker. I still call a beggar a beggar. I had, it took me time to say burger, and to also, because we use, when we mix, we say we stir, but at that time it was stare. So I had to use a lot of, gestures when I teach. But they went to the Afrikaans lecturer, and then the following day they came back. They say it's worse when an Afrikaans speaks English, right? So now that's one example. The other one, which is also a real story, I met a student first year looking for a physics lecture room. I said the guy should go to physics secretary. The first thing they asked me was, are they white? I said, yeah, but why should that matter? And he says to me, he never interacted with a white person before in his life. Right? Now, to me, and this is what I was going to suggest to my colleagues when we were discussing the issues of strategy, to say maybe we need to begin to intentionally group students based on where they come from, different sexes, to make sure that they mingle with each other during lab sessions and TAT sessions. But the impression that I got from your talk was we need to somehow encourage them to maybe end up with small pools of Xhosa-speaking, students, Afrikaans-speaking students. Am I wrong? Or yeah, that's what I wanted to, to get clarity on. Thank you.
Okay, so we noted that. Let's go to the second hand, Chris. And then also Baba is going to come in front. Can we also have the mics? Maybe if there's anyone who wants to add, doesn't necessarily have to be Dr. Ngubane.
Thank you very much. I think you actually read my mind, because I have something in line with the contribution that was just made. That we've seen cases like that also in my class, where students, the black students are in one corner, the whites So I think I'll be speaking more from the aspects where I think it's important for us to view Africanization, especially when talking about giving students a voice and being able to also speak their local languages in class. We need to be very careful and view that a little bit differently, because we also don't want to lose that flavor of them having to interact amongst themselves. That's very important, and that leads me to my first question, because I have it written here that what actually is the international, or will be the international benefits of Africanization? For example, most universities in South Africa now, they want us to, they encourage, you getting international grants, some forms of collaborations, etc., etc. You will know there are certain grants that they come in stages. The application is in phases. So mostly the last phase of those big grants, you have to probably travel to the UK or to the US or to wherever, Europe and all that. You have to be there face to face. You have to be interviewed and all of that. So if I contextualize what learning is contextualized based on my local language, then how do I fit into that society? I think these are things we must think about carefully. I understand we are not saying we should throw away the English language. We understand the importance of understanding and contextualizing things in our local languages or mother tongue, but we need to also think about the international benefits of this Africanization. And the second question is linked to, you only allow one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let's give the mic to Lubabalo first. You'll be in the second round, Nemo and the two gentlemen there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, firstly, comment then. Oh, it's still there. Firstly, comment then question. I'd like us to think about this thing about multilingualism in a way that it's actually empowering a lot of us in many ways. And I think the more you speak about something of this nature and the more you actually involve yourself in it, it makes things a whole lot easier for you to actually accept that it's going to be the future. Just like ChatGPT, none of us thought LLMs will run the world, but guess what? We do it every day. It's exactly the same. I think the context of higher education, and in fact education in general, is forcing us to actually go above and beyond the norm. Now, one of the biggest challenges, and this now question I want to pose to Dr. Gous. I see the training material and I'm reading all these glossaries and so forth. Do you think it would actually be a bad idea to ensure that whoever is working in these type of plants has to actually go through this accreditation to understand more than one language? Reason why I ask that is because we find ourselves in situations whereby, I never knew what Varsgiving was until I actually got into trouble. It's a warning, but it's one of those things. I think it would be necessary for us to actually not take this multilingualism as a suggestion, but it's actually something that we should take as something that is actually a need. So I pose that to you, for instance, when you work in the chemical industry.
Thank you. So I will allow Dr. Ngubane to respond. Chris, I'm not sure where you directed your question to the Jackie and Chanel, and Lubabalo, Dr. Gous. Over to you. Where's the mic? Where is the mic now? There it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think that I will first respond to Dr. Kwabe's question online. I'm indeed his mother. I taught him at MUT when he was studying a diploma in agriculture. I was a lecturer there in academic literacy. So the question is the entrance test, whether they're in the faculties or at a university level when students apply, those entrance examinations and tests and what have you, I think that we need to open these colonial wounds so that we heal. Because I think that they were meant to exclude African students from entering university. That my take. And because they were taken in English only. How to now make sense of a student coming from deep rural in KwaZulu-Natal to respond to that entrance exam? How would they start. Even though if they obtained distinctions in science or physical science or mathematics or anything, but the test is still taken in English. While the English native language student will be excelling in that particular test. What are you testing them? Why are you testing them? And this inequality now in the languages of testing itself, it definitely enables and it provides access to one group of students. I don't think that Nelson Mandela University still have those entrance exams. I do not think it will be disappointment on my part. All right, I mean, maybe you need to think about it. What is the purpose of those entrance tests and what languages are we giving them to students? Just to have an option. As somebody said, talked about options here when it comes to those assessments. Then there was a question from my colleague Prof there. You talked about parallel language instruction and disadvantages and advantages. At the University of the Free State, we no longer have parallel language instruction. We have one language of instruction, which is English. That's from 2016. So gradually, we have been dropping Afrikaans as a language of instruction. And in our new language policy 2023, we no longer have any parallel language medium of instruction, right? So yeah, all modules except where students are studying Afrikaans as a program or as a subject, then they learn through Afrikaans. In the Department of Sesotho, where they're learning Sesotho as a subject, they learn through Sesotho and English and on and so forth. So, but in other disciplines, they only learn through English. But that does not stop students, like we're saying, that to approach Afrikaans native speakers, lecturers, to go and maybe ask questions for clarification after that main English lecture, or even they go to the tutorials. I think that the question of whether must we separate students when we think about translanguaging tutorials, or whether we're grouping them in the class. Should we group them according to their the native languages? Those who speak isiZulu go and discuss distillation over the corner there, and those who speak and Sesotho to go over that corner there. Africans shouldn't go. I think that my opinion, we should move away from that. But it depends. There is no manual in doing this, right? There is no manual at all. What you want to achieve at the end of the day by grouping those students is very, very important. For example, if you want students to get diverse perspectives about each other's cultures when they are studying that concept, definitely you'll mix the group. You'll not say, but Basotho people go over there, because the Zulu student will want to grasp that richness of the concept in the other languages. Those diverse perspectives are very, very crucial. But still, it depends on what you want to achieve at the end of that particular lecture. Why are you grouping them the way you group them? If you prepare to group them according to those diverse languages, what is the purpose? Because when we plan our lectures, when we plan our lessons, the outcomes are very crucial. And when we integrate multilingualism, what is the purpose of that at the end of the day? So like I said, that there is no manual of doing it. Nobody will come with a manual to NMU and say, this is how we do it. But ourselves, just in case there's a vacancy, ourselves at MUT, like at NMU, will come up with our own manual, right? Yes. I think that I responded to that, but we can take this conversation to lunchtime, and then we can maybe talk about that. I think that was there another question that maybe I missed?
No,
I think I responded to them.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
We need a response from either you, Jackie, or
Chanel and I are going to do a duet.
Okay.
It's okay. Yeah, so Chanel, I'm going to start, and I'm just going to, in response to the question about what are the benefits of Africanization, then I'm going to just throw it back and say then, what are the implications of not doing that for our students? And just allow me to just read some things that I just wrote down here. What are the implications of them not being rooted in our own context for us and for our students, for our knowledge. At this university, in your faculty, you have 5 French students, according to the stats, 2 German, 1 Dutch, 3 Portuguese, 2 Spanish. And for them, I wonder if they are in their home countries, if that question was asked, what are the benefits of not being of Germanness for us, of Portugueseness for us? I mean, it's seen as natural and common sense that their knowledge is, dominant and paramount. So I worry about that question, but I also think that maybe something for you to interrogate, but I also am wary of what the students are saying. It's time to move beyond theorizations to action. That's what the feeling I'm getting. But I feel that that there is space. You need to interrogate what Africanization looks like in the Faculty of Humanities. Of Science. Does it mean that you are not engaged in Jonathan Janssen's entangled knowledges, where you're rooted in your own context, but you have this global outlook? Nobody's saying throw away a global outlook. As far as I can think, DVC.
Thanks, Jackie. Just to also respond to your intervention, it was really so beautiful, especially how you drew Fees Must Fall in. I think there's really a reason. It was very intentional that English and Afrikaans were put as the medium of instructions at these universities. It was to keep them elitist. It was to keep people out. That was one of the reasons. Because language is the point where you ask who is allowed in, who's not allowed in, whose knowledge is allowed in, whose knowledge is not allowed in. And language can be a point where we ask those questions. So this idea of translation, but then bringing translation in without bringing transknowledge in is also problematic, because you keep the normative in place if you only bring in translation without considering what knowledge is also being brought in. So this translation should be like dialogical. And I'm just talking to you because it's about this: who are we bringing in, and who, what purpose do they not serve, but how are they valued? Beyond just the access, because it's not just about the demographic access, but it's also about the epistemic, the existential justice that comes with that. So it should be a two-way dialogical process. I agree with Dr. Ngubane again with this idea of there shouldn't be linguistic balkanization. In the medical school, what we do is we pair students together, dialogue partners that come from different language groups, and then they learn so much from one another. So that has worked so well for us. So I don't agree, like you were saying, you need to be very intentional when you do that. What are the international benefits of Africanization? Whose universe do we want to fit in? This is my question. Is it always saying that we have nothing to contribute? Should we actually critique the notion of the universal, this one world that Escobar says? And also the ideas are it's always frustrating to me that the idea of the African expert is always not in Africa. It's always we need to go fetch them somewhere. And we need to be experts in our own country. It's interesting to me also in the US, when students want to go and study in Africa, they first need to learn the language, and that needs to be part of the ethics. They need to be able to say, I learned Swahili, I learned isiZulu, before they can come and collect data. But we don't require that from our ethics, from our students, and from our researchers here. So that's always, for me, very interesting, how we seem to devalue what we bring. That's my part of the duet.
Thank you. And if you are not satisfied with the responses, there's always time for interaction. I'll hand over to you, Dr. Gous.
Thank you. In response to Lubalo's question on industrialization and multilingualism, our students are being placed on various aspects in South Africa in various industries. Although I come from Xhosa background or Zulu, sometimes our students, Xhosa students, have been placed into a Zulu environment. Like, for example, Peter Marisburg. I have a student that is very bright. He's probably was top in his class in his cohort, placed in Peter Marisburg. And one of the challenges he had there was basically a language barrier, because he had to speak Zulu. And this glossary and learning languages actually have helped him quite a bit to understand what is being spoken. And there's another language that is not official. It's Fanica law, which is spoken in the mines. So there's a language is spoken in the chemical industries where people understand what they're doing, and the students are catching on that, but they need to have a good background for where they're going. So from an industrial point of view, for multilingual, it's not necessary to train industry, because it will be the language that's been spoken. Same with Afrikaans in Sasolburg and so on. The students need to learn, but there is a conversion taking place and multilingual is taking place. So there is quite a few of that type of things happening already in industry, where they can converse to one another and actually utilizing the language of that specific area. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those responses. I will now open the second round. Just one question. We're going to tap into our lunch time, right? That's not important. This is very important. I apologize for that. So it's going to be you say and the gentleman next to you, Nemo. And I was going to close it, but because it's you, then I'm going to open it up for for you, Dr. Kotonyati. So we'll have those 4 comments or questions. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doc. No, I just want to first say that I love your analogy of the learner's license. I mean, that was very, very powerful. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's how we know you. You used to teach me. So I'm partly captured, but I want to agree with Dr. Hoos on the part of the glossary, right? Because we do in Xhosa, most of the words are borrowed from English anyway. Like copy, that's not a Xhosa word, you know. But I don't know about baffles. I mean, baffles. I think there is a word for baffles in Xhosa. You correct me when you baffle to pitegile, you know. Yeah, but so I think that I don't know that which integrates with the question of ICT, because in science we use a lot of machinery, right? So do we translate those machines into our languages, or are we waiting to first complete the glossary, right? That's what I want to know from Dr. Hoos. And then from my fellow students, I think students are neglected in these types of engagements, right? And it becomes a problem. And I think my suggestion, I don't know, would be for maybe perhaps a student parliament whereby, you know, all students are learned, because, you know, the faculty of science is the most depoliticized, right? So how do we, I want to hear from you students, what do you think about that, or perhaps solutions in bringing students into these types of these engagements instead of making them consultives, or, you know, people that are consulted, you know. It's easier to go to Xhosa instead of translating to English. I'm the example, right? So I just want to say students should not just be consulted, but they must be part and parcel of the journey of what we want to achieve in our decolonial, you know, agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venner.
Thank you very much. Mine is quite, I think it's directed to the entire panel, because their presentations are quite enlightening about how the importance of, I just want to time on with language and learning. As a personal reflection, I was born and bred in the Eastern Cape as a Xhosa-speaking person. But then at some point in my life, I had moved to Gauteng, where it was a predominantly Tswana-speaking, in Pretoria, in fact. So it was a predominantly Tswana-speaking area. And in terms of, you know, that cultural adjustment and how the teachers, irrespective of what was being taught, I figured learners who were taught in not necessarily their mother tongue, but where the teacher was teaching in English and make some examples in, you know, the local language, it opened up a more conversational approach to the learning, whereby the learner interacting with some of the concept in their mother tongue. And I figured that now, as I began to pick up the language, because now I can speak Setswana quite fluently, I understood that it's also a cultural repertoire that sometimes I can draw on when I travel, how that richness then I'm able to interact with other people at that particular level. So I like how, you know, this conversation on language, and I'm happy that it's happening as we're still mourning the death of, you know, the giant Unguki, who was very instrumental in, you know, advancing the conversation on African languages and how we can begin to think, even when we talk of decolonization, what does decolonization mean to me in my language as a Xhosa-speaking African located in this particular place? So those are some of the politics of that particular language. So mine is not necessarily a question, but it is just a comment on, you know, the plenary discussion that, you know, we need to keep this conversation going, and we need, you know, to draw on, I don't say we have a universal language, but there has to be a language where, you know, we can interact at the same level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for those inputs. Nehemiah?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panelists. I want to give a consideration as opposed to a question because we're out of time, and maybe we can talk about it during lunch. I really enjoyed the horizontal and vertical trans-languaging and looking at how trans-knowledging is a result of that. We see that in our classrooms as lecturers who invite Xhosa comments or Afrikaans comments who are able to converse in that way. And so I'm starting to feel from the room that multilingualism is a very uncomfortable transition per se, because of the fluidity of the space. There are no board rails, there are no borders that says these students must go there, these students must go there. Oh, we're gonna segregate them again if we group them together. Oh, we're gonna alienate them again, you know. So how does it actually look like? And so it's uncomfortable. I want to then posit that, are we forgetting the lecturer at the front of the classroom? What type of development or skills does this person need to engage in this multilingual space? And sometimes you don't really need to be the center of attention as the lecturer. It's for understanding. And so if the conversation is going and it's understood and it's felt, you can leave it and move on. But the importance, again, of multilingualism as a form of increasing understanding or a form of creating knowledge, and not necessarily for a mode of teaching. Just that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair, for allowing me to say something. I'm tempted to say unemayo ndibethe emlonyeni, because what he's saying is some of the things I've been wondering about as I'm sitting here. For me, language is an issue of access to knowledge, access to the curriculum, access to each other. And we may want to acknowledge, because we've spoken a lot about the culture, the politics behind it and all of that, but we may be missing a concept around neurology. Language is a neurological issue. And we may need to then get into that conversation as a university, because my mother tongue is Xhosa, but English is my fifth language. And I have to navigate accent and tone and tonton and intelligence in the midst of it all, because I have to be impressive. Yet we haven't probably looked at how we are netted or needed to be able to access the languages and knowledges that we are trying to bring into the space. We have allowed students to go and take another language within their programs, but we haven't done that for academics. Most often than not, the academic is unilingual and may not be able to access any of the discussion in the classroom, whether we're translating or translingual or multilingual, and therefore they are left out of the learning process themselves, because we all learn in this journey. It's not just the students. So we may have overemphasized the journey for the student, but have left the academic and the support person who needs to interact with the student and in different languages, especially when they arrive into our university. And that point of some people have seen and have heard a white person speaking to them for the first time happened with a master's student in psychology, who couldn't learn anything because they were looking at this person, listening to what they were saying, but not hearing the words, but listening to the sound. So there are deeper conversations that I'm wishing to have, especially on the neurological elements of language that separate us as people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kotenyati, the Dean of Learning and Teaching. Colleagues, we're gonna wrap it up. So when you respond, just make it quick. I'm not saying that but I'm not saying just, but that's how we speak, and we understand each other, right? But there's still one question from the Zoom platform. I don't know who is directed to, I guess, the entire panel. Does this dialogue discuss tribalism, as this aspect does still take place in society? It is never talked about broadly, but it's there. It exists. So if you can also comment on that. So I think, Sean, you are first, and then whoever wants to fill. If you feel you fit for purpose, you can answer.
On that question.
Okay. All right. Yes, of course, yes, for you, boss.
On that question, yes, glossary is a tool, it's a language tool. So to start with that, together with your study guide, will help and assist the students. So that could be a good idea to actually start formulating a glossary for where you want to go, and the languages. I think that there's a new draft for language policy at this university at incorporating Afrikaans in its Xhosa, and there's also other languages. Like I said, there's quite a few other languages or students that come in from other regions. So it's a matter of thinking about how you want to construct a glossary, and together with a study guide, using as a tool in the classroom environment to actually build the knowledge for the students.
Thank you, Sean. Prof, you're going to follow up?
This also comes to a question of language development. While you would, in this glossary, say baffles, right? If you do a direct translation, it would be Isipitanis, something that confuses flow, you know. But if you go deeper, actually, to direct flow, we are more paitai, you know, to redirect flow another way. So this is more actually, if you go deeper into really doing a language development process rather than sometimes doing a direct translation. So people will understand that if you want to redirect flow, you have to tie here and open here for things to go that way. So this is more in a true sense of a real rich language translation. But if you do it just loosely, it will be Ispitanis, because a baffle is something that confuses things. So there's this issue of translanguaging, of transknowledging is very important.
Yeah, that was very trans. Thank you so much, Prof. I think this is also one of the reasons why when we ask for translations, that we also need someone to check whether it has not lost its, what? Finish that sentence. Its meaning. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that. Who's going to tackle the next?
So Chanel and myself, and then the students.
And some will just comment, say, colleagues, you don't have to respond to the comments.
Okay. Yeah. Is it all right, please? Can we
Yeah.
go? So I'm going to respond, and then Chanel's going to respond to the Dean, Learning and Teaching, our Dean, about the Language Development Plan, or Dr. Muki. Respond on our behalf. No, I'm only teasing you. Chanel's going to respond. But I just want to talk. I found it so interesting that the students brought up the issue of deep politicization of students, and this speaks to me to the transdisciplinary endeavors we need to engage with. Recently, I was in an interview on a panel where students had to, it was something that they needed to be interviewed for. It was across the institution, and I know our students, Denver, our humanities students, we say we can talk, right? But we also need the skills. So we need the skills from other faculties to help us. But I found that in terms of geopolitics, that the students from, I'm not going to name names, which faculties, but there was, it was very kind of shallow. So we need to have transdisciplinary offerings for each other. So just to talk about that, I think Kama, he's gone now. He's our MA history student. I see he's sitting here, so we're very happy to see that. He's left now. So just in terms of the Nehemiah, the uncomfortability, I think that is good in a way, because hopefully it will take us forward. We need to talk about, and I think it's good to be frank, but we also need to be uncomfortable in knowing that we are not, what is the Vygotskian thing, Dr. Muki, we're not the only knowledgeable others, that our students are also knowledgeable others, and how do we bring their voices in the classroom so that it's not one-way communication? That's just not what a lecture should be all about. For cognition. In terms of neurology and cognition, I know there's a lot of work done, but then it's done in our space, and it's about how we do this transdisciplinary work together, Dr. Pumeza, because now we have it, but it's not getting out there. So I'm just advocating that we also, when you Africanize, also look at the transdisciplinary advantages that can come into the space. Chanel?
Thanks, Jackie. I don't think I have much to contribute. I think you did a brilliant job. I just wanted to comment perhaps on the glossaries. I think we need to really think about how they are being used as pedagogical tools. On the one side, I think we need a best practices on how we are developing them. And this should be us as academics in consultation with perhaps students, in consultation with, as Jackie was saying, communities. So it needs to have this consultation so that we can see, but then beyond that, then how do we then bring them back to the classroom? Because sometimes they're just on Moodle or on Funda, and they're just there. So I'm really thinking about how we are using these multilingual resources actively. So that is one of the things that I want to focus on in this language policy journey. Nehemiah, I like your question. So this has come up a lot in the conversations when we are consulting with faculties. The way the lecturers feel about them in not being able to control the classroom. But then who are we centering then? Are we centering then ourselves? And then are we forgetting, as you were saying, not the learner, but the learner is not is over focused on. So in the new language policy, actually, Dr. Nkotanyati, what we did is whenever I presented, I always say I don't necessarily draw on the politics so much. I always say we are mobilizing multilingualism to highlight the links between language and cognition, and this is coming through, so this is coming through particularly through what we want, how we want to capacitate our lecturers in these multilingual pedagogies. Because the multilingual pedagogies are there for lecturers then to be able to utilize languages in this horizontal way, this vertical way, this use of trans-knowledging. But I do agree with you that I think that we need to have more conversations about really about the links between language and cognition, because it is like most conversations I'd say it is about politics. So I think there is a real need for us to highlight this, because these studies have, when I looked at Kathleen Jeug's work, this has been coming from the 90s, like the links between language and cognition, but they are not filtering in. I don't know why. So I mean, it's so interesting to see all the depth of work that has been done, but it's not being shared widely. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to, where's the mic? It's coming. I'm going to respond to tribalism. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will respond to that question on tribalism when whether multilingual pedagogies, translanguaging practices, do they bring back tribalism or are we trying to bring back tribalism, or how do they dismantle tribalism? It's a sensitive question. I think that's why you gave it to me. But I think that when we speak about translanguaging, right, we talk about dismantling. I'll go back to that term, dismantling these linguistic hierarchies, linguistic boundaries that normally occurs when we think about the languages. But when that is why we also say that when we think about translanguaging, it focuses more on the speaker than a hearer. When you walk into a classroom where students are translanguaging, you'll think that they're not making sense at all because there's so much languages that are moving across. But they're making a lot of sense. They're negotiating meaning by crossing all these linguistic boundaries. So my son, for example, is a second-day student, but I cannot definitely say, we cannot say that he's a Zulu home language speaker because he went to an English medium school, medium instruction school. And his grandmother is also speaking another language, and he watches Mubango, and he watches Generation. The social media language is different as well. So our students, when they come to university, are so multilingual than we think. And I think that the issue of tribalism and thinking that of tribalism, I think that the multilingual pedagogies, translanguaging practices are trying to get us to move away from those tribalism ideologies. That's the issue of the past now. Colonialism actually achieved that because I cannot boo a Sesotho, but I'm a South African. Then you'll wonder, why can't you boo a Noma? Because at KZN, nobody actually taught me Sesotho, but Sesotho is spoken right in the Bloemfontein, right across. So the tribalism actually survived, but we are trying to move away from that as well. That is why I was saying to that a colleague of mine to say that when we mix them according to their language background, that also trying to cut this tribalism in a way in the classroom. Because when you speak Xhosa, you explain Xhosa, somebody explains Sesotho. I'm also learning Sesotho in that particular group setting. I'll be learning one word, like Sean was saying, that it might not be 5 words, but I'm learning 1 word per day, through interacting with Sesotho, a language speaker in that particular group. I think that it seeks to move away from those tribalism ideologies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give our presenters a round of applause. And also hoping that conversations will not stop, they will continue. And lunch is ready. Thank you so much. See you at 1:30.